Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
All right, Dan Millman, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here with you, Ryan.
Yeah, it's been, I think, 15 years that I've been following your work, and you've had a huge impact on me. So this is an honor. The point of this is really to expose people who have never been exposed to you before to some of your ideas, hopefully. And if even one person finds it that hasn't found your work, I would be grateful that they did. So I think early on I read your first book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And then it led me to your second most popular book, which is The Life You Were Born to Live. And I'd love to get into some of that, but also I just wanted to say, wow, you're 78 years old now. And I think people would be pretty impressed to see how you look. You look like you're 52 or something. So it's incredible.
Well, 18 books. It only took me 40 years to write them. And for those listeners who aren't familiar with my work, I might start by just explaining, what do I mean by peaceful warrior?
I'd love that.
Okay. I was teaching at Oberlin College. I was an assistant professor there, and I was doing a martial arts class featuring Aikido and Tai Chi. So we do part of Aikido and then part Tai Chi. And I was naturally going to call it for the catalog The Way of the Warrior, which made sense. But then I thought about it and I said, wait a minute, Aikido and Tai Chi are both internal arts. They're not aggressive arts. They're more receptive. And so it didn't quite click. And then a light bulb went on and I went, hey, why don't I call the course Way of the Peaceful Warrior? And that's when I first came up with the term. And when I wrote my first book, I didn't know what to call it. It was about so much. But that came up for me. Why not Way of the Peaceful Warrior? And it seemed to have resonated with many people over the years, over the decades. And what I mean by that term is like, how can you be peaceful and a warrior? What I mean by it is that it's really about all of us. That's why so many people resonate with the idea that we're all seeking to live with a peaceful heart, a sense of serenity, equanimity in the chaos and changes of everyday life. But at the same time, we have to recognize that there are moments we need a warrior's spirit. And it's not just about fighting, it's except with the inner demons of fear, self-doubt, insecurity, that sort of thing. But there are times we need that courage as well as the love. It really means rolling up our sleeves and marching into life and doing what we need to do. And that takes courage. It takes courage to love in this world because we lose whatever we cling to eventually. So that's what I mean by the term peaceful warrior and why it applies to everyone that I know.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I love how your philosophy is always so practical and you can actually apply most of it directly, which is pretty rare these days. I think a lot of people can get caught philosophizing, but people don't know what to do with it, you know?
Yeah.
So
Good
that
point.
you and John Kabat-Zinn are two of the people that I've never met in person, but I've really loved how you take something so abstract, mindfulness per se. A lot of people write books about mindfulness, but he makes it so simple, and I feel like you do the exact same thing. So,
well, I appreciate that, and to be in the company of John Kabat-Zinn, I like his work as well. And mindfulness has become a thing. It's become like a one-stop spiritual shopping. I practice mindfulness as if that's a solution, but really it just means paying attention to what's going on in the present moment without judgments, just being aware, as we might in meditation. And that's really the sum of mindfulness. And when we turn the mindfulness internally, as in meditation, we see what's kind of coming up, emotions, thoughts, ideas, images, and so on. We call it mindfulness meditation. And when we, more important, because most of our lives are not lived in a sitting position, we're moving around our daily lives. So when we turn our attention, our mindful attention, to the external world, um, we're again paying attention to what's going on.
Mm.
And that can be quite useful, especially when we're driving.
Yeah. It's like, you've probably heard of Thich Nhat Hanh. He has like little simple books about the same type of stuff. And I love the way he does that as well.
Same.
Um, I'm curious where your philosophies have changed in the last few years looking back at your life. Has it really shifted much as far as your perspective from your 30s and 40s and
Mm,
what you're thinking now and how you orient now?
yeah, interesting question. Um, well, my most recent book is called Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit, the true story of my spiritual quest. Because those who have heard of Way of the Peaceful Warrior, the book, or seen the movie, have many kind of imaginings about what really happened, what's true, what's not. And my first book does blend autobiographical fact with fictional elements for the sake of the teaching and the story. And in that book, I describe a 20-year apprenticeship with four radically different spiritual teachers. One I call the professor, one I call the guru, one I call the warrior priest, and the fourth is the sage. And they represent different phases in my own spiritual development. So, yes, my ideas have changed, or let's say evolved or matured over time. I found ways to articulate them better.
Mm.
But one major shift that I took when I was in the sky of mind, the metaphysical realms, the speculative areas that we can't prove or disprove. I'm sure you've interviewed folks, who have many ideas. Like some people say I caught a cold, others say I'm having a cleansing crisis. It just
Hmm.
depends how we frame our reality. Um, but they represent, again, a maturation and evolution. Now, one revelatory place, when I met the sage, the fourth mentor, and I spent years with each one over time, um, he brought me back down to earth because I was lost a little bit in ideas and concepts, even though I tried to be a practical from the start because I was a coach and an athlete. So I went for practical outcomes in real life. I viewed daily life as a form of spiritual weightlifting to strengthen our spirits.
Mm.
Um, so that was the arena. But I had some ideas that weren't really reality tested. And I discovered that really midway in my teaching work. And what it comes down to is this: it's about focusing on what we have more control over rather than what we have less control or no control over, which is not a good use of our time or attention, probably. So, what can we control? Well, the sage pointed out to me, and I've been expressing this in my own way ever since, that we have less control over our thoughts. In other words, we don't have spam filters in our head. Um, Thoughts happen to us. We don't say, I think I'll think this thought next. They just arise in our awareness, our field of awareness.
Mm.
And they do that with or without our bidding. And sometimes the thoughts are positive and sometimes they're negative. So rather than trying to fix our thoughts or do more positive thinking, which I've been around the track. I've done all the meditations and practices, and sometimes my thoughts are positive and sometimes they're negative, but I've made peace with them. I'm
Mm.
no longer trying to fix them, change them, run from them, obey them. As in meditation, you just notice they're there. You accept them as natural to you in the moment. That's what
Mm.
I practice. So I'm not trying to, the complicated world of, uh, again, positive thinking. In fact, sometimes I ask an audience, how many of you have read a book on positive thinking? Many hands go up. And I go, great. And how many of you have only had positive thoughts for the last, say, couple of weeks? All the hands go down. And I go, but if you'd read the book twice, if you'd done all the exercises in the book, if you'd highlighted maybe you'd be having more positive thoughts, or maybe
Mm.
not. Maybe it's just natural as dreams come to us, sometimes nightmares, sometimes pleasurable dreams. Thoughts are the same way, they just arise.
Mm.
So it's not a matter of stopping them or quieting the mind, even though the mind can feel quiet in deep meditation. It's not about that. It's about accepting them as just natural and moving on. Now, what about emotions? Now, so many people tell me I'm interested in enlightenment, in personal development. But really, deep down, if they search their hearts, they might find, I just want to find a way to feel good more of the time and feel bad less of the time, about
Mm-hmm.
myself, about the world, about other people. So emotions are very important. I'm not in nothing I say or suggest should be a denial or ignorance of emotions or dismissing them. In fact, emotions carry information. If we feel depressed or angry or sad or afraid every time we're with a certain person, maybe there's some action we need to take. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not about ignoring emotions, but can we control our emotions? Now, there are courses in anger management. There are courses that say, yes, you can learn to control your emotions. I suggest that's plain wrong
Mm.
because emotions pass through us like the weather. They change all the time. We can't will ourselves to fall in love with someone we really don't like, or vice versa. We can't uh, just will ourselves to stop loving somebody in a heartbeat. Now, we've all snapped out of it. We've all had moments where we were sad or angry and then we just started laughing. But wouldn't that be nice if we could do it every time?
Yeah.
But those are rare occasions. We don't have direct control by our will over what we're feeling in any given moment. And a quick story. I was giving a talk in San Quentin prison. A group of inmates were in a program called the Inside Prison Program, doing yoga and mindfulness meditation.
Mm.
And one fellow approached me after a little talk I gave and said, Dan, I have a problem with anger, with rage. And I said, no, you don't. Respectfully, with due respect, but no, you don't. He said, yes, I do. I said, no, you don't. I said, the problem you have is not the anger. That's just an internal storm. The
Mm.
problem you have is what you do when you're angry. And a light bulb went on for him. It was like,
Mm.
now I can get a handle on this. I can focus on my behavior rather than trying to fix my emotions.
Mm.
Anger management courses don't control the anger. They control behavior, what you do or don't do. Count to 10, that's a behavior, that sort of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm suggesting that we can simplify our life radically by not worrying so much about whether thoughts are positive or negative. Just watch them pass. Same thing with emotions, to accept them as natural to us in that given moment.
Mm.
But focus on the one thing we can control. And this is what I learned from the sage. The one thing we can control is our behavior. If I asked a listener right now to touch the tip of their nose, they could do it, unless they're disabled, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would be difficult. But most of us can will ourselves to have our hand rise up and touch our nose. We can't necessarily will ourselves to feel great about that, or happy about it, or have positive thoughts about it, or keep our mind on any one thing for an indefinite time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the recognition, and I know it's a long answer, but I think it's an important idea to share. And it can save a lot of confusion and complications, which is our lives are shaped over time primarily by what we have done over time, not by what we felt or thought, even though some people say it all begins with a thought or an
Mm.
inspiration or a particular feeling. But somebody came up to me after a talk I gave once, and they said, Dan, I feel really inspired. I said, don't worry, it'll pass. Because inspiration comes and goes. Motivation waxes and wanes.
Yep.
What we can count on is what we do.
I
So
love
that's a
that.
long answer to
No,
the
I,
question here.
I love when you speak because it's very eloquent and you've spent the years writing, so it's you trimmed all the fat and it's just very nice to hear. But um, I, as a first responder, have seen plenty of suffering, and I've always been very curious, especially early on. I started to get curious about the nature of addiction. And, I've even done my share of reading about nervous system stuff and the body keeps the score and all this stuff that you can take in to learn about the nature of suffering. And I'm curious after all these years what you think about the nature of suffering and addiction. And a little side piece to that, the nature of victimhood versus the opposite, which to me would be gratitude and opportunity. And I've noticed I don't it's a fascinating subject because some people seem to be more prone towards oh poor me or victimhood, and then some people are more prone towards the orientation of looking at opportunity. And
Mhm.
then you could just say, well, it could have to do with privilege and all the other elements that come in. But the nature of suffering and addiction, and then victimhood versus opportunity. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
That's an articulate question, as a matter of fact. And by the way, I'm so grateful to first responders. That's all I'm going to say about it now. But I'm right at this moment. We can get into that if you want later. But I so appreciate those who run toward the danger to
Mm.
help other people. To me, that's definitely a peaceful warrior in training. So, as far as your question goes, there's a saying, a Serbian saying, two men looked out of prison bars. One saw mud and the other saw stars. Both mud and stars exist in this world, both the
Mm.
positive and the negative, the light and the darkness. Um, and if we ignore or deny the mud, we end up stepping in it. So we have to be aware and vigilant, but we also want to remember the stars. So things can be we all look through the world through our perceptual filters, uh, and some of us have rosier glasses, others darker glasses. Just like some countries have more cloud cover, some people have more cloud cover in their
Mm.
lives. So that accounts for some individual differences. But well, I have almost too much to say about addictions. I had a family member who had struggles in that area,
Hmm.
and I've done quite a bit of reading on addictions. Um, Life does come down to what we do, and we can have all kinds of reasons and causes and emotions and traumas and PTSD, but still, if it may be easy for some, given comfortable environment in which they grew up, no traumas to speak of, and so on, it's easier for them.
Mm.
Someone who has gone through really tough times and has struggles or afflictions in the area of self-worth or self-esteem or other things. And these are two different things. Self-esteem and self-worth are two different things. But
Hmm.
it's they are more prone to getting involved with addictions, whether it's a quote unquote positive addiction to exercise, um, or an addiction to heavy processed carbohydrates, which can result in less nutrition and more weight gain and so on, or whether it's an addiction to alcohol or other drugs. Um, the addiction is a word, it's an abstract term, but it really refers to somebody who tends to repeat something over and over, to self-medicate, let's say,
Mm.
to still their suffering. Now, you asked me to address the idea of suffering. In the Buddhist terms, um, the Buddha said all life is suffering, but what he actually meant was dissatisfaction. Dukkha, I think the word was in Pali. Um, and if we don't get what we really want, there's some suffering involved, struggle, frustration, disappointment. If we get what we really don't want, also suffering or dissatisfaction.
Mm.
And even if we get exactly what we want in this world, that still represents suffering because we can't necessarily cling to it forever. Life comes at us in waves of change. We can't predict or control, but we can learn to surf those waves. That's a
Mm.
life skill, a foundational life skill, surfing the waves of change.
Mm.
Sometimes you get the elevator, and sometimes you get the shaft.
I love that.
So that involves existential suffering. Even if our lives look pretty good, um, we go to a restaurant, we're looking forward to a particular meal, and they're out of it. Suffering. Minor, of course, not compared to agonizing pain, for example. Um, but psychological suffering is just as real. Emotional suffering is just as real.
Mm.
And many people, because of that, they respond in a way rather than going out and working out, um, or even having a cookie or a cake or whatever, they end up self-medicating. And that has its own liabilities, as we all know. I don't have to tell anyone that. So for me, it would sound like pablum for me just to say, just feel grateful for your life. Look at the bright side. Oh, yeah, well, people have tried that. But it comes down to that. It comes down to, cognitive behavior therapy is really about shifting our perceptual filters. So we change our behaviors, but also our perspectives on things. That's why I wrote Way of the Peaceful Warrior, to encourage people to look at life's higher promise and potential.
Mm.
Through my own journey with that old guy in the gas station I called Socrates, played
Mm-hmm.
by Nick Nolte in the film adaptation. So I think that's how I would address the questions you raised, the issues about suffering, about self-medication or addictions. And there are no easy solutions except focusing on something new rather than struggling with the old and trying to break that. Focus on building a new habit of
Mm-hmm.
not smoking cigarettes, of not drinking as much alcohol. Recent studies show, you can say anything after recent studies show, but they really do, that no amount of alcohol is actually good for anybody. There was a long time where they said, yeah, moderation. People do better with moderation than even people who never drink. But now they're saying that is shifting. The weight of consensus is that any amount of drinking is just, now to me, alcohol or psychedelic drugs are maybe used under sacred occasions. Ayahuasca, for example,
Mm-hmm.
even marijuana, it's a sacred, mind-altering kind of experience. So I've never really believed in casual, everyday drug use or alcohol use. But if somebody wants to have a guest over for dinner and have a little wine, a few sips, great. It's wonderful. Part of life. I don't drink, not because I have anything against it, but genetically, I just have not had a taste for it. I
Mm-hmm.
really don't like alcohol. So I will tell you this, though. When I was in college, and I relate this story in my memoir, Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit, I'd shattered my right leg in a motorcycle crash, and I was, on crutches and so on. And I went into a really introspective space. I really recognized my own mortality. And I became more thoughtful, more sober for somebody, young 20-something. And I said, I want to see what's inside. I want to see the inner realms. So I asked a friend of mine, this was in the 1960s at UC Berkeley, in California. And I
Mm-hmm.
asked a friend of mine on the gymnastics team, Herb, do you know somebody who can get me some good Owsley, LSD? And he said, he knew me pretty well. And he said, Dan, have you ever smoked grass? I went, no. He said, have you ever been drunk? I went, no. He said, you better walk before you run.
Mm.
So he advised me to do both first. But I didn't like smoke in my lungs personally. And as I said, I didn't like alcohol, so I just went for the gusto, the whole full Monty. And for me, the first time I took LSD, I used it as an entheogen, which is a way to find spirit, not just blow my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I did it very respectfully. I read the psychedelic experience. I had the proper safe setting.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a casual thing. It was a ritual, and it was like the whole ego death. It was incredible. I mean, it changed my perspectives on life.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I did it only one more time, a couple of years later, and it was a waste of my time.
Hmm.
Yeah, I hallucinated, but waste of my time. So it's not uh, something I recommend. I'm not a zealot or proselytizer. For me, it was useful at the time I did it. And it informs some of those out of body kind of things I describe in Way of the Peaceful Warrior. It was inspired by that initial
Mm.
experience. So maybe that's more than you asked. TMI,
No,
perhaps,
I'm
perhaps not.
no, I love it. And I am curious because the psychedelic experience, a lot of the elements of it that are most useful, it seems, over time when you read about them and maybe even have them yourself, is that death experience. And I've been curious about death and dying as a subject matter to get more interested in. And I read a book called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker.
Ernest Becker, he was one of my professors at Berkeley.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Fantastic book. And
yeah.
I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are around the denial of death and how much that impacts us and how people can start to build the memento mori component to the philosophy in their life. Like, I like to meditate on my death.
Yeah. The best thing I could say in response um, is that at my website, and I don't normally do this, but I'm going to mention this. At my website, peacefulwarrior.com, there are several online courses. And one of them is a meditation um, on the process of dying. And it's unlike most meditations in this realm.
Mm.
Um, and the way it came about, this particular meditation, which was my own creation, um, I once attended a talk by Reb Anderson, who is a mindfulness teacher. Uh, and after the talk he gave, I said, Roshi Anderson, can you suggest maybe the two most important things to meditate properly? And he said, yes. First, you must have a good posture, a good sit. He said, not leaning forward into the future or backward into the past, but sitting stably in this present moment.
Mm.
I said, great, thank you. What's the next thing? He said, oh, then you must die. And I knew he didn't mean physically die. He meant psychologically die. And I started contemplating that. And I thought about, well, what is it like to die? What process do we go through? And that's what created a 4-minute meditation. Another one of the courses that I have at the website is the Peaceful Warrior Workout, which I've been doing as part of my overall routine every day for the last 50 years.
Wow.
And it's a 4-minute routine. It's based on the idea a little of something is better than a lot of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great warm-up for the day, for the mind. Breathing, it emphasizes breath work as much as the movements, and it gets every part of the body. 4 minutes.
Awesome.
And anybody can do it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just for athletes, for example. But this meditation happened to also take 4 minutes. And again, based on the same principle. Simple is powerful because we're more likely to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do this every day, this meditation. In
Wow.
fact, I did it for a year and a half before I ever presumed to teach it. But the reason I created this meditation, yes, it does diminish the fear of death.
Hmm.
Because what we really fear is the unknown. And some people will cling to beliefs about death, what happens after death, as a consoling idea. And that's fine. We don't know what happens. People claim they do, or they've had near-death experiences, and they describe that. But no one really knows and has come back to tell us what it's like and what happens. But we do know this: the body decomposes. But while we live, it's so easy to take things for granted. I ask people sometimes when I'm giving talks and so on, what do you think you'd feel like if you woke up tomorrow morning and discovered you were floating off the bed, that you could fly?
Mm.
Just like Peter Pan or Superman, Superwoman, whatever, that you could literally soar into the sky. What do you think? And people would give me things like light, free, liberation, ecstatic, and so on. Yeah, probably. But after a few weeks or months or years, you would take it for granted, just as we take for granted seeing and hearing and feeling and the people around us and so on. And so I created this meditation on the process of dying and letting go and surrendering, because I've found no other way to help us better to appreciate everyday life. Even if we've got our difficulties, challenges, problems, we're alive.
Yeah.
And yeah. So that's all I'm going to say about that, except what the purpose again of the meditation is not only just to appreciate life, but to familiarize ourselves and accept and be willing to give up those things of life. And then, as Socrates, the old character, once told me in the gas station, it's a little more radical than puberty, but nothing to really worry about. He said, death is perfectly safe.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love it. It's very practical because the truth is, like you said, we just don't know. And the mystery is what people tend to either avoid or fear. And if you do focus on what you have, I like to think of myself as the accountant, which is the gratitude piece. And if you slow it down and use the breath and you start to take account for the fact that you have a heart and your lungs and everything's just happening, it's such an amazing practice and it really becomes medicine, and it's free.
Absolutely.
So,
And by the way, just as a side note, you mentioned gratitude again. I have no control over whether I feel grateful in the moment. When someone has anyone ever given you a present and you really didn't feel gratitude? Sure, we all have. But I can control what I do, which is to say, thank you. That is gratitude in action, to express appreciation. But feeling gratitude, even feeling love. I can't control whether I feel loving moment to moment, but I can practice loving kindness, even if I'm not in the mood.
mm,
And that's a big one. Most people go, no, why would you do that? You see, one of the most controversial things that I teach is that I do not recommend or encourage people to feel grateful or happy or peaceful or kind or loving or confident. I only ask them to behave that way. The reason that's controversial is people go, well, wait a minute, did I hear that right? You're not encouraging me to feel that way, just to behave that way? Isn't that pretense? Isn't that hypocritical to feel one way and act another? Well, every first responder I know has felt afraid, but still they do what they need to do. Because courage is not the absence of fear, as we all know. It's the conquering of it. You can't show courage unless you're feeling afraid.
right.
So in the same way, what if someone could save the life of a toddler who was wandering in the middle of a busy street with cars whizzing by at night, and they see this little kid out there? They might be terrified to run out in that street, but they do anyway. They find themselves grabbing the kid, running back, taking it to safety. Now, they were feeling afraid, yet they behaved courageously. Is that hypocrisy? Is that pretense? Or is that virtuous?
Mm.
How about feeling shy and walking up and saying to somebody, would you like to go out for coffee? What about feeling insecure, but behaving with confidence. That's what I'm talking about. And that's really a form of liberation.
Mm-hmm.
When you're no longer bound by the tyranny of what you happen to be feeling in the moment or having negative thoughts.
Yeah.
So this is a reminder again, a lot of things we accept, we tell people feel grateful. Well, they can't control that. That feeling will come up now and then,
Mm-hmm.
They can do things to try to generate a feeling. That's what method actors do. They try to generate real feelings to have a authentic performance. But sometimes they fail. Often they fail.
Mm-hmm.
But we can behave how we wish.
Mm. Yeah. So practical. I love that. And I've always had a pretty good fear, like most people, of public speaking. And then I realized if I flipped it a little bit and thought, that just makes me feel alive and excited, it actually gives me the opportunity to do a lot of the things I would have never done. And I would have probably never had the ability to have the impact or whatever it is that I'm
Beautiful.
doing. And it's sort of selfish if you get in the way and allow that fear to mask your ability to act or serve. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Fear of public speaking. That's a big one. In fact, a Canadian study rated it as a slightly greater than the fear of death
That's
for
wild.
many people.
Yeah.
Because when we're with another person and we say something and they just look at us blankly, we can project all our insecurities on them and they seem to be judging us. Well, if we're with two people or 50 or 100 people or 1,000 people speaking publicly, we can feel very judged.
Mm,
But if we just focus on what do I want to share, and
right.
doing that well, rather than focusing on ourselves, did they like me? Do they approve of me? There's an exercise I recommend for people who worship the God of opinion, of other people's opinions,
Mm-hmm.
because we're here to trust the God or goddess of our heart. But we can't do that while we're monitoring the God of opinion. So what I recommend for people who are struggling with other people's opinions and what other people think about them is they can build a little altar in their bedroom and maybe put a white cloth on it or some incense or flowers, whatever. And then they build themselves or buy a little god of opinion. It can look like Garfield the cat or Darth Vader, um, or someone's picture on a piece of clay, whoever represents the god of opinion. And every morning when you get up, now this works at the subconscious level, so it's very powerful. Yes, it's humorous, but it's very powerful. Every morning when they get up, I recommend that they physically, and by the way, this is only for a couple of weeks, not the rest of their lives, this practice. But for the next week or two, they get down on their hands and knees. They bow down to this God of opinion physically, and they go, I worship you, God of opinion. How do I look today? Do you approve of me? And then they go about their day. Now, if someone comes in on them while they're doing this, that's even better. So, what are you doing? They go, oh, I'm just worshiping my God of opinion. This makes it very conscious. And later in the day, after they've done this little ritual, if someone seems to be judging them and they can go to themselves, hey, that looks like the God of opinion. I'm treating that person like the God of opinion. But I know where it is. I left it back on my altar today and I've already worshiped it today. Do I want to do this again?
That's great.
That's the practice. And it's actually pretty much a cure for being sensitive to what other people think of you.
Hmm.
And you realize, you've heard the saying probably, Kevin. Ryan, I'm sorry.
It's all good.
You probably heard the saying, Ryan. What other people think of us is none of our business.
Yep. I've heard that, and it's powerful because it's true.
Opinions are
Yeah.
like navels, right? Everybody's got one. But
Yeah.
that's their issue, not ours. We need to live our life. And one of the major difficulties I see in life today is people compare themselves to other people. When I was teaching gymnastics classes at Stanford University, I noticed that some people would learn a backflip on the trampoline after learning all the fundamentals. They learned it faster than other people. Maybe they had a better background, whatever, preparation. But I also noticed that those who took longer to learn it often learned it better than those who learned it faster.
Hmm.
So we need to respect our own way of learning, our own style of living. Because comparing ourselves to someone else is either going to make us feel superior or inferior. And it's a profound disrespect for our own process, for who we are. We're not here to live anybody else's life. So that's why I say it's a major issue. And if we just stop comparing ourselves to other people, we end up coming from a place of authenticity. And like what you see is what you get. That's
Hmm.
how I live.
That's beautiful, and it's very empowering because you're never going to have everybody like you anyway. There's always
No,
going to be people that don't resonate with you, and then there's people that love you. So it's nice to see people's true expression. And that's actually what makes humans so unique is the individual expression of that person being them, you know?
boy, that is so true, Ryan. You know, when I was a freshman in college, I kind of had a crush on this girl who didn't give me 2 cents. She just had no attention for me. And I was trying to figure out a way I could get her to like me and so on. And one of my teammates, um, Rick, his name was, Rick said, Dan, he said, some girls are going to like you no matter what you do, and some girls are not going to like you no matter what you do. Why don't you spend your time focusing on the girls who do like you? Because I took them for granted. That's a typical male pattern, right?
Yeah.
Just trying to win the affection, somehow prove something to myself if I could just get her to like me. And I just stopped that because
Yeah.
I realized, it's like she just wasn't that into me. And that's her taste and her own values and so on. And so I started focusing on people who seemed to like me. And
That's
so
cool.
I'm just reiterating, underscoring what you pointed out. Beautiful.
Yeah. When you were doing gymnastics, competing at a high level, I remember you telling a story, and I'd love for you to share it. You did some incredible move and stuck the pose. Can you talk a little bit about the advice that Socrates gave you then when you thought you did it really well? You did some incredible move, you stuck the landing, and he called you aside. And can you tell that story?
Oh, now I remember that story. That's been a while. Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, what happened was I was getting back in shape after shattering my leg, and I was finally, reaching a peak again. And I did this difficult dismount from the high bar, twisting double somersault. And I stuck my landing, and I went, yes.
Hmm.
And I figured that was a good place to stop workout for the night. Socrates happened to be in the gym watching me. And so I ripped off my sweatshirt, stuffed it in my workout bag. And we were walking down the hallway afterward. And he he stopped and he said, that last move you did was really sloppy. And I said, what are you talking about, Socrates? That's the best dismount I did in weeks. He said, oh, I'm not talking about the dismount. I'm talking about the way you took off your sweatshirt and stuffed it in your bag. And I went, whoa. Because he was reminding me again, I was treating one moment as special, flying off the high bar, and another moment as ordinary. So he reminded me once again that there are no ordinary moments.
Hmm.
How we eat, how we bathe, how we walk, how we treat other people, every moment counts. It's not ordinary. It counts for something. Now, we fail all the time, of course. We go unconscious, we get distracted, um, we have auto accidents because of one of two things: haste or lack of attention. And so, living more mindfully in that sense, uh, recognizing there are no ordinary moments, can really enhance the quality of our moments, which means the quality of our hours and days and lives.
Mm, I like that. Yeah, that's such a cool story. Just making it more about that mindfulness again in your life, just making that a practice, but not making it something where you have to sit on a yoga mat. It's
Right.
part of a. You've spoken to the word paradox before and leverage, and both are powerful philosophical orientations. And I'd love for you to, if you want to, just touch on those two.
Sure. Uh, let's start with paradox. A paradox is is comprised of two apparently opposing statements and somehow reconciling them. Uh, in Way of the Peaceful Warrior, in the book, I have this, Socrates gives me this business card that says, Socrates, proprietor, Peaceful Warrior Services. And he said, paradox, humor, and change. Those were his three buzzwords. And we know something about humor, cosmic humor, not taking ourselves so seriously. And change is a rule of life, and to learn to surf that. But paradox confuses a lot of people. When I was a young man, I was searching for wisdom, and I wondered what were the rules here on planet Earth?
Mm.
No one seemed to know, even though some people pretended to. And so I started collecting quotations. It's been a lifelong hobby of mine, a calling, if you will. And I've collected thousands of different and sorted through my own filter, favorite quotations, which I post on Facebook and in my web newsletter and so on. I love to share them. And the first quote I came across as a young man was, a penny saved is a penny earned, by Ben Franklin. It seemed very practical. But then I came across a quote that contradicted that, which was, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I said, wait a minute, should I save the penny or should I risk it? Nothing ventured. Yeah. And then I came across a quote that was, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And there was some truthfulness to that. It seemed like there was some accuracy because we get in habits. But then you're never too old to learn, which was true. Then I came across another quote that said, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Now that seemed true, but out of sight, out of mind.
Mm.
Birds of a feather flock together, but opposites attract. I came across so many quotes that seem to contradict one another, yet both in their own way are true.
Mm.
And I actually came across something original. In one of my books called The Hidden School, I describe this way to understand life, that we live in two worlds. We live in the practical, conventional world of everyday life. Taking care of kids, getting an education, going to work, all those things we need to attend to. But yet, even people have been very successful at the conventional world. Maybe they're very wealthy or recognized or famous. They may wake up at night wondering, is this all there is? News, weather, and sports? And they may have a yearning for the transcendent. Why many people go to church or temples, synagogues, mosques, wherever they go to try to connect with the transcendent. They take psychedelics, or they do spiritual practices, again, trying to connect with the transcendent. That's another aspect of our being, and about rising above and looking at the big picture of life.
Mm.
So each of these levels, the conventional and transcendental, have their own truths that operate, and they can be opposite. For example, does time exist, or do we exist in the eternal present moment? Yes, both are
Yeah.
true. Does free will exist, or is it an illusion? Yes, both are true. Are we all one? I love to think that. Or are we separate selves, responsible for our own decisions and so on? Yes, both are true.
Mm.
And finally, is death real? or an illusion. It's both real and an illusion. And it's hard to understand that, why both could be true. I go into that more in my seminars, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, it depends on what perspective we're coming from, transcendental or conventional.
Hmm.
And so, in a sense, there are people much smarter than I am who argue, philosophers who argue free will is real or free will is an illusion. Neuroscience is leaning toward the illusory part. But it's important we treat free will as real because we live in conventional world, in daily life.
Mm-hmm.
So in any case, that's what I would say. Paradox, understanding paradox. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times,
Yeah.
right? From Dickens. Both are true.
Awesome.
And we could argue either side of that argument. So that's what I have to say about paradox. Was there another thing? And I promise to be briefer because I know our time is running.
No, it's all right. Leverage was another one that I've heard you speak about.
Ah.
The importance of it.
You know, there was a scene that I didn't write the screenplay for the Peaceful Warrior movie, the adaptation, but I did get a couple of scenes in, a couple of lines as well, 2 weeks before they started shooting. And one scene in the movie, and also, I believe in the book, is Socrates and I are walking down the street. And during this period with Socrates apprenticing with this old service station attendant and cosmic teacher, I was doing a lot of work on myself. Internal work, self-analysis, self-observation, meditation, and so on. And so we were walking down Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley, and I said to him, you know, Sock, I feel kind of guilty, all this navel gazing. It's kind of selfish, focusing on myself rather than being active in the world. Because that statement was stimulated by seeing a poster for starving children and the war, ending the war in Vietnam, and suffering around us. Shouldn't I be more active? And he turned to me and he said, take a swing at me. And I said, did you hear what I just said? He said, come on, I'll give you $5 if you can slap me on the cheek. I figured it was some kind of test. So I took a swing at him and found myself in a painful wrist lock on the floor, on the ground. And as he helped me up to my feet, he said, notice a little leverage can be very effective, Dan? I said, yeah, I noticed. And shaking on my wrist. And he said, you want to help people? Of course. Do what your heart tells you, you know, be kind and help others. But don't neglect the work on yourself, which will give you the clarity to know how to exert the right leverage at the right place at the right time to really make a difference. And that's what I've been seeking ever since for the last 50 years through my writings, teaching, how to express things, and being an example. That's the most, you know, Albert Schweitzer said, in influencing other people, example is not the main thing. It's the only thing.
I love
And so
that.
I've been trying to live as an example. And I fail sometimes, we all do. But to my children, grandchildren, and people around us, you know, that's what they really watch.
Yeah, you've done a fantastic job. And I know you got to get going, but I ask every guest one question if you have the moment for it. If you were going to die today, what would you share with the world?
Isaac Asimov, the writer, once said, if I had 6 minutes to live, I'd type a little faster. That's not me, though. I've retired from book writing. After 18 books, that's enough. I've done it. But what would I share with other people if I were going to?
Yeah, almost as if I actually wrote this for you specifically a little differently because you've written so much and already shared so much. If none of that was accessible to anyone and you had this last statement
Yeah,
to people.
I would probably remind them to trust the process of their life unfolding rather than struggle with it or ask why, to trust it. And I'd add that we cannot lose our way. Wherever we step, the path appears.
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. You're an amazing guy. I'll make
Thank
sure everybody can find your work and your TED Talk and your website. But thanks a lot, Dan.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.